Changing the game to help tackle the chip shortage. A new bill in Washington looking to ramp up domestic production of semiconductors and decrease dependence on foreign supply chains, which could have major implications for New York's economy. Hello and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I am Solomon Syed in Albany. Well, multiple pieces of legislation at both the state and national level bringing additional resources to a growing industry here in New York. Governor Kathy Hochul this week signing the Green Chips Bill. The legislation providing $500 million in increased tax incentives for job creation in the manufacturing industry. And meanwhile, at the national level, President Joe Biden this week signing the CHIPS and Science Act into law. The bill bringing $52 billion dedicated to domestic manufacturing of semiconductor chips. Senator Chuck Schumer, who sponsored the legislation, says the massive cash infusion, along with tax incentives to build factories in the U.S., could put New York in line to become a global tech hub. And we're joined now by Stephen Grasso, the Managing Director for Global Government Affairs at GlobalFoundries. They manufacture semiconductor chips out of Malta, New York. Stephen, we appreciate your time today. Want to get right into it. You watch the progress of this bill very closely. You already have one chip fab in the capital region of Malta. You're working on another. What kind of impact can this bill have on that work as you try to expand?
Well, first, Solomon, I just want to say thank you for having me. Short answer, it's going to accelerate it. You know, a semiconductor facility or fab is costly to build and requires high utilization to be viable, which is part of the reason why there's an imbalance between supply and demand today. So at GlobalFoundries, we're kind of working a new economic model, and it's really a partnership with our customers, the local communities, and governments to expand capacity and to increase output. And that output you're going to see in upstate New York, Vermont, and probably across the world. So the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022 is going to accelerate all of those efforts. And you know, if we're fortunate enough to receive some federal investment from the CHIPS Act, we're going to combine that with investments from our customers to accelerate manufacturing and R&D expansion, specifically in Malta.
I know a lot of customers want to see that manufacturing aspect expanded and accelerated. We'll get to that a little bit later. Want to stay with the CHIPS Act for a little bit longer here. We know that foreign countries have been making very aggressive pushes for years to bring those manufacturing operations overseas. This is a potential $280 billion investment domestically here in the U.S. Does this go far enough to encourage competition here in America?
Yeah, you know, Solomon, that's a really great question. You know, the investments being made by government is an important and welcome step. And it's absolutely going to help make the U.S. semiconductor manufacturing landscape more competitive. Now, other countries have been subsidizing chip making for years, and this will help close the gap. And it goes back to why have they been doing that? And that's because semiconductors are so important for national security and also for economic security. So, you know, this bill, the CHIPS Act that just passed, it's going to expand semiconductor manufacturing. It's going to help build out the U.S. semiconductor ecosystem. It's going to help with advanced research and development. And it's going to kind of bolster every step of the process, from the raw materials all the way to packaging and assembly.
Now, Stephen, the CHIPS Act is a bit of a combination. There's investments, there's also tax incentives. From your standpoint, which is the more effective incentive? Is it tax incentives? Is it investments?
You know, that's an interesting question. I think it's kind of a two-pronged attack, right? So I think each have, you know, there's a case to be made for each, and I think each are equally as important. I think, you know, as you look at the legislation, this was contemplated, right? So the CHIPS Act piece is about grants to help dramatically increase and quickly increase capacity expansion. And then the FABS Act, which is a refundable tax credit, helps incentivize kind of the long-term investment into the industry.
Now, Stephen, we have seen those tax incentives come under criticism from politicians. It's one of the main reasons, as you might recall, Amazon ultimately chose not to build one of its headquarters in New York City. I think the question that some folks have is, why can't this be accomplished without those tax breaks?
Sure. So, you know, not to repeat myself, but again, a fab is very costly to build in the billions of dollars. And it's part of the reason why there's a little bit of an imbalance now between supply and demand, specifically in the US. Making chips is one of the most expensive and complex industrial processes on earth, hands down. So, at GlobalFoundries, we really think you're going to have to look at these incentives on a case-by-case basis, on a business-by-business basis to see if it makes sense, right? And you got to ask some pretty basic questions like, what's the competitive landscape? What are other countries doing? What kind of jobs are going to be created with this? Are these minimum wage jobs, or in the case of GlobalFoundries in Malta, New York, where the average salary is $90,000? And there's a great argument to be made that we've had a huge impact on the local economy. And when you look at that impact, you also have to look at what's the history of investment been made. The New York State made a pretty heavy investment in order to bring GlobalFoundries to Malta, New York, and we're proud to say that the state's received at least 4 times its investment back, and is probably the most successful economic development project in New York State history. So, Solomon, it's not a blank check; it's a catalyst. And the goal of that catalyst is to produce a return on the investment.
We talk about a return. A lot of folks want to know more about what you were talking about earlier, which is accelerating production. You talked about the importance of semiconductor chips. We have been seeing global chip shortages. It's impacting supply chains with vehicles, electronics. How is GlobalFoundries working to improve their technology to ramp up production?
Yeah, no, again, another great question. So, there's an insatiable demand for semiconductors. You mentioned a couple of them. Vehicles are going to continue to use them. A point that I always love to raise is your typical car uses, a couple hundred semiconductors. As we move to electrification of vehicles, those vehicles use upwards of 3,000 chips per car, right? So smartphones and devices like that are continue to use more and more chips, and connectivity as we move closer to Internet of Things and 5G. Again, more and more chips are going to be used. So, the events of the last 2 years have caused many industries to rethink their supply chain strategies. At GlobalFoundries, we've entered into long-term supply agreements with our customers that guarantee them future access to make sure there aren't disruptions. We announced direct long-term agreements with Ford, BMW, and Bosch. And we need more semiconductor manufacturing capacity in the US. That's the short answer. And that was the goal of the CHIPS bill. And we think that now that it's passed, that's going to come to fruition.
All right, Stephen, a little bit of time left before the break. In your opinion, what else would you like to see done both in New York and on the federal level to level that playing field in the semiconductor game?
Great, and I'm glad to end on this. Really, what it's going to come down to now is talent pipeline, right? GlobalFoundries and all semiconductors are going to need more technicians and more engineers. And I think that we just need to have an increased awareness of GlobalFoundries as a potential employer in upstate New York, and understand that all sorts of different types of educational backgrounds can participate. About 40% of our employees in Malta joined us with a high school education or just a 2-year degree. And we're partnering with local colleges and universities on training programs, apprenticeships, internships, work-to-study program, in order to continue to push that pipeline. So I think we just need to get more young people interested in semiconductor jobs, make them understand that these are careers and there's paths to improvement. And I really think talent is going to be the next thing that we're going to have to focus on as more capacity comes online.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it too. Stephen Grasso with GlobalFoundries, we appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, the CDC may have relaxed its COVID-19 safety guidelines, but the healthcare industry is still dealing with the impact. We're going to be joined by somebody on the front lines to break down a potential new law that could ease the burden by expanding the role of physician assistants. In the meantime, if you have a comment or story idea, let us know. You can email Empire State Weekly, and you can also find us on Twitter. And welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I am Solomon Syed in Albany. Well, the CDC relaxing its quarantine and social distancing guidelines this week. It's recognition that many don't see COVID-19 as the threat it once was. However, new infections do remain steady worldwide, that according to the World Health Organization. Globally, though, deaths from the virus are down 9%. Now, here's a look at the latest data from New York State. From the 6th to the 8th of this month, 58 people did pass away due to COVID-19 infections. The 7-day average positivity rate in the state, that is over 7%. According to the state, there are currently over 2,000 people hospitalized with COVID, over 200 of them in the ICU. Now, with COVID still straining the healthcare system, physician assistants have been granted expanded treatment roles under an emergency order. We're pleased to be joined by Jonathan Baker, a physician assistant and former president of the State Society of PAs. Jonathan, we appreciate your time today. Want to get right into the questions here. There is a law that could open up and allow PAs to be classified as primary care providers for Medicaid purposes. My question to you is, do you support that?
Absolutely. We're really excited about this piece of legislation that passed the Senate and Assembly this year and are looking forward to the governor signing it.
Now, Jonathan, just kind of break it down for our viewers exactly what this would entail, or what would this law do in terms of expanding the role for you and your fellow PAs?
Absolutely. So, already PAs serve as primary care providers for patients across New York State. We're recognized as primary care providers by Medicare and by several commercial insurances like United Healthcare and Cigna. The statutes and laws around Medicaid were written before PAs were even in existence over 50 years ago. And so we weren't included in that piece of legislation. So in many cases, PAs are already serving as primary care providers and often doing primary care work even for Medicaid patients. So this bill will allow us to be recognized for that role, which is really important in a number of different ways. And before I go through those, I just want to specify that this is not all of Medicaid. Medicaid is very, very complicated, and these are Medicaid managed care plans. So these are plans that there's a insurer like United maybe administering the Medicaid benefits. And so when a patient goes to look for their primary care provider, if they search through that United Medicaid database, for example, they wouldn't find a PA. Once this legislation passes, then we'll actually be recognized in that role. And when they search for a primary care provider, they'll be able to identify a PA. It's also really important for purposes of referrals. If we're recognized as a primary care provider by Medicaid, then we can refer patients out to their specialist, which might be a surgeon or some other type of specialist.
What have you seen during the pandemic in terms of the load that has been shouldered by PAs? Obviously, the entire healthcare industry has really been put under stress, but I'd have to imagine that PAs and their expanded role under these emergency orders, they have been asked to do quite a bit more than they were before, just like everybody else.
Yeah, it's been a strain, on everyone, not even just healthcare. Think of any business has been strained by COVID, but healthcare especially, and PAs in particular. And the reason for that is that PAs already have a really wide scope of practice. We already care for patients in every specialty, in every setting, of every age across New York State. Our training is as a generalist, so we really learn all different fields of medicine. And have this ability to pivot in between specialties. So someone who is serving as a primary care provider may have previously done infectious disease work and really be poised to respond to COVID much more effectively than someone who maybe doesn't have that experience.
And this wouldn't impact those who would still like to see a more traditional doctor if that is their preference. Is that still an option to them under this?
Yeah, absolutely. Physicians, of course, are incredible healthcare providers, and patients would still have access to physician primary care providers. The place where this benefits the most are more rural areas where there's maybe not as many physicians available. In rural areas of the state, PAs actually make up a greater percentage of the total practitioners rather than in the more metropolitan areas, there's a fewer percentage of PAs. So in those sort of more rural areas where physician access isn't available, this will make a huge difference. But where there is a physician available, that will still be an option for Medicaid patients.
So, Jonathan, you talked about this, and we have reported on this. Obviously, this was passed by both the Assembly and the Senate. It is sitting on the governor's desk. What's the holdup here? How much longer until the governor might put pen to paper on this, and what are some obstacles?
So the governor has until December 31st to sign this piece of legislation. Once it actually hits her desk, she'll have, I believe, 10 days to sign it. As far as we know, there's been no opposition to the governor signing the bill. And I don't believe there's anything holding it up. I think there's a lot of really urgent and sort of hot topic matters that she's probably pressing along with first. But the governor has expressed her understanding of the importance of the role of PAs in healthcare, especially in the last 2.5 years. And we do fully expect that she'll sign this.
Jonathan, as we wait on that and we look ahead to the future before we wrap up here, is this the future of healthcare? For so many years, people thought, hey, if I'm not feeling well or if I have some type of issue and I need to see a specialist, I go to a doctor. But PAs more and more are filling that role. Do you see this as the future of medicine?
I think this is the now of medicine, and I think this is the future of medicine as well. Physicians aren't going anywhere. Physicians are highly trained, wonderful providers. I work alongside 2 wonderful physicians in my practice, but there's just not enough care. And as the population ages, as there's newer health concerns and chronic health concerns, we just need more and more capacity to be able to see patients. So PAs provide an option of high quality evidence-based medicine, and study after study shows similar outcomes to that of physicians, as well as often reductions in of the cost of healthcare. So physician assistants are now and physician assistants are the future. So PAs really are the solution here.
Jonathan Baker, we know that you're working long hours. We appreciate you taking time out to join us here on Empire State Weekly. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Well, it's been 1 year since former Governor Andrew Cuomo announced his plans to resign from office. We're going to take a look back at how it all unfolded and how dealing with the new administration compares to the previous one in the eyes of political watchdogs. In the meantime, if you have a comment or story idea, let us know. You can email Empire State Weekly, and you can also find us on Twitter. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Solomon Syed in Albany. Well, it has been 1 year since former Governor Andrew Cuomo announced that he was planning to resign from office and that then Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul would be taking over. Capitol correspondent Jamie DeLine looking back at last August's surprise announcement and how observers say the current administration measures up.
1 year ago, Governor Andrew Cuomo held a press conference just days after a scathing report from the New York Attorney General was released, which concluded he sexually harassed 11 women. Cuomo saying the allegations were false.
Don't get me wrong. This is not to say that there are not 11 women who I truly offended. There are. And for that, I deeply, deeply apologize.
It was then, after multiple calls for him to resign and the possibility of impeachment, that Cuomo announced he'd be stepping down and that Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul would be taking over as governor.
She can come up to speed quickly, and my resignation will be effective in 14 days.
And that's exactly what happened. Hochul became the first woman governor of New York State. To this day, Cuomo maintains his innocence.
But it certainly was a political earthquake in Albany and changed the direction of the state. Certainly Governor Hochul is not, completely dissimilar policy-wise to her predecessor, but it is, it's a clear break with the Cuomo administration to have the Hochul administration now in office.
1 year later, I asked Blair Horner, NYPIRG's executive director, if he feels as though things have changed in Albany since Governor Hochul took the position.
Much of Albany's DNA continues to operate. So, decisions made in secret, that's the same. Negotiations between the governor and the leaders and a lot of issues that the public doesn't even know about getting hammered out in secret, that continues. It's obviously quite clear to anyone that deals with the Hochul administration that you get treated differently than you did by the members of the Cuomo administration.
Now Governor Hochul is running for governor in her own right, trying to become the first woman elected to that position in New York State. Reporting in Albany, I'm Jamie DeLine.
Thank you, Jamie. Now, meanwhile, former President Donald Trump invoking the Fifth Amendment in New York City, refusing to answer questions under oath. The deposition he was taking part in, part of Attorney General Letitia James' civil investigation into his real estate practices. The deposition coming after a federal search warrant was carried out at Trump's mansion in Florida. Okay, stay with us. We're going to have a look at the week ahead coming up after one more quick break. Finally, here on Empire State Weekly, we are keeping an eye on elections as we are nearing the congressional and state Senate primaries in New York. Early voting beginning Saturday, August 13th and running through Sunday, August 21st. Then primary day itself set to be held Tuesday, August 23rd. Now, there will also be two special elections for two vacant congressional seats, one in the current 19th district and one in the current 23rd district. For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I am Solomon Syed in Albany. We'll be seeing you again next week. Don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over New York State. Here's the full schedule of Empire State Weekly on 10 television stations across New York.